when you think of the Bible, don't think of it as a piece of clay. Bible's not like clay. With clay, you put pressure on clay and it molds. It conforms to the pressure that you put on it. The clay conforms to us. The Bible is more like a rock, where when you put pressure on it, it's actually you're the one that actually conforms. It's solid, it's stable, and we are the ones who are to be conformed to the text, not putting pressure on the text in order to try to change what the text is saying. And I feel like I got a fresh taste of this reality this week, because sometimes you think you know what sometimes you think you know what a passage is about. You go to a passage in Scripture, you know it's totally okay. Whoever the crying baby is.
I don't know what we're talking
about. This is normal. We're good with it. Sometimes you go to a text, you think you know what the text is about, and then you reach what I'm going to call trouble spots in the text, where the text is not doing what you think it should be doing, because you think you already know what the passage is talking about, and there are parts of the text that are pressing against what you're trying to make the text say. And when that's happening, it's probably an indicator that you're misinterpreting. You've got a misunderstanding of the text. And so I came into this chapter 4, this passage of chapter 4, and I assumed that this was an account of the same event that's taking place in Matthew chapter 8. In Matthew chapter 8, there's a centurion from Capernaum. And he goes to Jesus in Capernaum, and he says to Jesus, I have a servant who's paralyzed. And Jesus says, oh, let me come and I'll heal him. Jesus actually says that. And the centurion is like a Roman soldier. He's a commander over, I think, 100 soldiers or something like that. He's a commander over a number of soldiers. And the centurion says, no, Lord, I'm not worthy for you to come to my house. I am a man of authority. When I tell my men to go here or to do this, I speak the word and they go. I know how authority works. All you have to do, Lord, is say the word and my servant will be healed. And the Lord is amazed at this man's faith, that this man so trusts in the authority of Jesus that he knows that if Jesus speaks the word, the servant will be healed. And so Jesus heals the servant from a distance. I thought that's what this passage was. I just thought this was John's account of this passage. And my assumption created an expectation that Jesus is coming into his homeland and he's going to be happily welcomed by the faith-filled Galileans. And he's looked to for help by a centurion who's full of faith and who has somebody back home who needs to be healed. So Jesus gladly provides the healing. And that's how I was reading this passage. And then there were trouble spots. There were 3 major trouble spots as I was going through the passage that I kept trying to conform to what I wanted the passage to say, and it kept resisting me, which is a good thing. And once I conformed, the passage actually opened up. The meaning of the passage became clearer to me. So we'll see if we can walk through that and show you guys this morning. Let me give you some context for this passage. Let me tell you where the passage is heading. It's heading toward verse 54. Take a look at verse 54. This was now the second sign that Jesus did when he had come from Judea to Galilee. So this passage is heading toward a sign. Jesus is going to do a sign. We're going to look at the sign that Jesus does. We're going to watch him perform a miracle in Cana. It's the second miracle he's performed in Cana. The first sign in Galilee we read about in John chapter 2, where Jesus turned water to wine at the wedding. And in John chapter 2, verse 11, we read that the first of his signs, Jesus did at Cana in Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. So John's making a point to say in Cana, in Galilee, Jesus is doing signs And it's because signs play a really important role in John's gospel. To begin with, there are a lot of them recorded. There are so many signs recorded that chapters 2 to 12 are often referred to by scholars as the book of signs. So there's a lot of signs taking place, miraculous works of Jesus taking place in chapters 2 through 12 especially. Additionally, there's a sense in which these signs are viewed as a good thing. They're help for people's faith. There's a sense in which that's the case. And we know that because at the end of the book of John, John says this, chapter 20, he says, "Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book." Jesus did a lot of signs. And then he says, "But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." So I'm recording these signs for you, and the reason I'm recording them for you is because I want you to believe in Jesus. Signs play an important role in the book of John in helping faith. But there are other times when we see in the book of John that when a person's faith is solely based upon and infatuated with the signs themselves, in the book of John, people are dangerously misled by signs. So, for example, John chapter 2, verse 23. "When he was in Jerusalem at the Passover feast, many believed in his name when they saw the signs that he was doing." Which you would think, in light of chapter 21, that would be a good thing. But it says, Jesus on his part did not entrust himself to them because he knew all people. He knew these people saw the signs, and the only thing they saw were the signs. And their faith in him was a type of faith that only believed in him as a miracle worker. This guy can do great tricks. And so Nicodemus, for example, was one of these types of people. That's immediately what comes after this passage. These people in Jerusalem, they saw the signs, they believed because of the signs. Jesus did not entrust himself to those people. Let me introduce you to a man named Nicodemus, who comes to Jesus and says, "Master, we know that you could not be doing the things you're doing unless you were from God." So Nicodemus sees something, but his faith is squarely built upon the signs themselves. He's aware of the fact that Jesus has access to supernatural power, but he's spiritually blind to the glory and the supernatural nature of the person of Jesus himself. And that's what Jesus talks about in John chapter 3 with all the discussion about being born again. Nicodemus, you can tell that Jesus is from heaven. You can tell that Jesus has power, but you can't see the glory of the man. So signs apparently have the potential in the book of John to be an incredible aid to faith, and they also have the potential to be a deceptive source of focus. And the difference has everything to do with the heart and the ultimate obsession of the heart. And today we're going to look at Jesus deal with this issue with a royal official from Capernaum, not a centurion, and we're going to take a look at Jesus do a sign in Cana. Okay, that's where we're heading. Here's where we're coming from in the book of John. Jesus has just come out of Samaria, which is, Judea is the southern region, Galilee is the northern region, Samaria is that middle region. Jesus is coming out of there, and he's had an extraordinarily fruitful time of ministry with the Samaritans. There in Samaria, Jesus, without the use of any miraculous signs whatsoever, lovingly ministers to an adulterous Samaritan woman at Jacob's well, who then in turn goes and ministers to her entire village, who then in turn comes out to Jesus, spends some time with him, asks him to remain 2 more days, and many more put their faith in Jesus, resulting in mass conversions and the heartfelt belief that Jesus is in fact Messiah and Savior of the world. It's a really great section of Scripture that demonstrates that there were people who were receptive to Jesus, extraordinarily receptive to Jesus, the Samaritans. They weren't even Jews. That's where we're coming from. Jesus is just coming out of that situation, and that brings us to today's passage, We're about to head into the sign, and John gives us a little bit of background before we get to the sign itself. Check out chapter 4, verses 43 to 45. John tells us that after the 2 days that he spent together with the Samaritans, after the 2 days, he departed for Galilee. For Jesus himself had testified that a prophet has no honor in his hometown. So, when he came to Galilee, the Galileans welcomed him, having seen all that he had done in Jerusalem at the feast. That should be a little warning flag for you right there. For they too had gone to the feast. Okay, I want to show you some very strange logic in this paragraph. These are trouble spots. And if you don't let them trouble you, you will miss what John's doing. Let me show you the logic. Jesus departs from Galilee Jesus departs for Galilee because a prophet has no honor in his hometown or in his home country. The NASB says home country. The Greek word can be translated either way. Jesus heads into Galilee, his home country, because prophets get no honor in their home country. What? And therefore, the Galileans welcomed him. What? Okay, it's strange logic. Don't read over it and just say, Jesus went into Galilee because he wasn't honored in Samaria, and therefore he was welcomed in Galilee. That's not what it says. That would make sense, but it's not what it says. So there are two strange points of logic. The first one is in verse 44. It's that word for, or because. Jesus departs for Galilee because it is a place where he is not honored. So here we go. Jesus is in Samaria. He goes north up into Galilee. Here it is. Jesus grows up in Nazareth, as many of you probably know. He's heading up into Cana. This is Galilee. And in his home country, prophets are not honored. Prophet's not honored in his home country. So here he heads, and he's going there because there's no honor coming. Okay, the natural logic might be Jesus went to Galilee, but he knew he would be dishonored. That would be logical. Or Jesus went to Galilee, therefore he knew dishonor was coming. That would make sense. But it says he went to Galilee because there's no honor there. And now you need to be shaped by the text. Let it rest. You have to wrestle with it. You have to chew on it. You have to ask some questions and let it make an impression on you. Why would Jesus go somewhere because he knew he would be dishonored there? That's the question that we need to ask if we want to dig in. Does that make sense? You guys tracking? Why would he head into trouble? Why would he head into dishonor? And I think the answer is related to some of the things we've already learned about Jesus, like this. John chapter 1. The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. Jesus goes places where he's not going to be received. Or, John chapter 3, the light has come into the world, and people loved the darkness rather than the light because their works were evil. Jesus is willing to go places where he's not going to be received. In fact, this is the MO of Jesus. This is what Jesus does. He sees people who are at war with God. He sees their hardened hearts. He knows that they will reject them, and he goes there because they are hardened sinners. He goes to those who are going to reject him. He knows that they will reject him. He knows they will mock him. He knows they will spit on him. He knows they will pull his beard out. He knows they will whip his body to a pulp. He knows they will hang him like a cursed man on a cross. And he goes there because of those things. The Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world, performs his salvation project by fearlessly walking into the hands of those who reject him. This is what Jesus does. His whole mission is flavored with this, I'm going there because they're hardened. I'm going there because they'll kill me. And that's how I'll save them. He will save by heading straight into the eye of the storm. So, this is how he does things. Boldly moving toward rejection on a mission to die so that he can save his murderers. That's a very rich idea. I think that's how John is thinking here. Jesus knows that he's going toward the Galileans who will dishonor him. That's the first point of strange logic, okay? So he's on a rescue mission, heading into the eye of the storm. These people are going to dishonor him. Here's the next strange logic. Verse 44, Jesus himself had testified that a prophet has no honor in his own hometown. The parentheses are not in the original. The parentheses are not in the NASB. Parentheses are in the ESV. Jesus had testified that a prophet has no honor in his own hometown or homeland. So, when he came to Galilee, the Galileans welcomed him. Okay? That's weird. That's a trouble spot. Let it bother you. What's John actually trying to say here? Prophets aren't honored in their homeland, and therefore, when Jesus comes into Galilee, the Galileans welcome him. Huh? Okay, so we've got to ask questions. What's going on here? We've got to chew on it, ask questions. What would be natural here? It would be natural if prophets aren't honored in their homeland, and therefore Jesus was not welcomed. Why does John tell us that a prophet is not honored in his homeland and then say the Galileans therefore welcomed him? Well, maybe it's because their welcome actually wasn't honoring to Jesus. Maybe that would make sense. Maybe when it says Jesus will not be honored, therefore he was welcomed, the welcoming was not honoring to him. Let's read it again. When he came to Galilee, verse 45, the Galileans welcomed him, having seen all that he had done in Jerusalem at the feast, for they too had gone to the feast. What's the reason behind their welcome? This man does magic. Strangely familiar to those verses we read at the end of John chapter 2, when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover feast. Many believed in his name when they saw the signs that he was doing, but Jesus on his part did not entrust himself to them because he knew all people and needed no one to bear witness about man, for he himself knew what was in man, and it wasn't good, what was in these people. In chapter 2, we see that there's a type of faith that does not save because it does not see, it does not delight in the person of Jesus for who he is in himself. It believes in him because it likes to see him do tricks. And in what we're seeing here in chapter 4, I believe, is that there is a type of welcome that does not honor Jesus because it does not see and delight in the person of Jesus for who he is in himself. It merely welcomes him. It merely invites him in because it likes to see him do tricks. I think you've got the same thing going on. And therefore, Jesus, who will not be honored when he goes into his homeland, he is therefore welcomed for being a trickster. I think that's what's going on. I think that's how the logic leads us. And I think as we watch the rest of the story unfold, we'll see, okay, we're totally tracking with what John is doing here. Okay, so with that in mind, let's take a look at what happens next. John chapter 4, verses, I'm going to read 46 to 49. So, he came again to Cana that's wedding town. Cana in Galilee, where he had made water wine. And at Capernaum, there was an official whose son was ill. When this man heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, he went to him and asked him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. So Jesus said to him, "Unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe." The official said to him, "Sir, come down before my child dies." Okay, so Jesus heads into Cana. And let's see. This one here. Okay, he goes into Cana, and there's an official in Capernaum, which is about 14 miles away. It's about a day's journey, and he's a royal official. The word that's used there can mean official or royal official. The NASB probably gets it right. He's a royal official. He probably works for Herod, King Herod. And the official has heard that the miracle worker who was down in Judea at the Passover, he's come into town. And it's good timing because the official's son is ill and about to die. So he goes to Jesus in Cana, takes the day's journey, and he asks him to come heal his son. Now, I want to point out that in Matthew chapter 8, the story about the centurion, in both cases, the men are from Capernaum. In Matthew chapter 8, it's not his son that needs to be healed. It's a servant who's been paralyzed. So there's one difference. That's how we know it's not the same story. And in Matthew chapter 8, the healing actually takes place in Capernaum. And this healing takes place in Cana. So we're talking about a different event, two events in which Jesus is going to heal somebody in Capernaum from a distance. So we're talking about a different event, and if you, like me, are expecting Jesus to be cheery and to commend this man for his faith and to be amazed at how there's such faith in Israel. In fact, I think that may be where even Jesus says, "I've not seen such faith in Israel." It's with this centurion. If you're expecting that right here, you're going to be really disappointed because Jesus is not going to talk to this guy that way. I want you to listen to the way that Jesus responds to the request, and this was a trouble spot for me. When this man heard that Jesus had come, this is verse 47, when this man heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, the magician's in town, he went to him and asked him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. So Jesus said to him, "Unless you," and that's a plural, "unless you guys, you Galileans, see signs and wonders, you will not believe." This was a trouble spot because as I read this passage, I'm like, that sounds like a rebuke. And I was expecting Jesus to commend him for his faith. And besides that, wouldn't Jesus want to heal this man's son? And aren't the Gospels full of healings? And isn't Jesus abundant in his willingness to help broken people? And this guy's got his own child is sick. And Jesus always seems to be willing to move in on those situations in the Gospels. And doesn't he want to heal this? But this seems like a rebuke. And the reason that it sounds like a rebuke is because it's a rebuke. Jesus is rebuking this man. This should trouble you. And you should go, this is not the same story, is it? John tells us that Jesus rebuked the official who's making the request. And the reason that Jesus rebukes him, and the reason that Jesus is rebuking him and the rest of his Galileans, is because this official, just like the rest of the Galileans, regard Jesus as a magician. Unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. There's no indication anywhere in the text so far that this guy gives a rip about who Jesus is, other than the fact that he can do something really powerful. So let's step back for a moment. I want to contrast the two scenes that are in our view here. On the one hand, you have the Samaritans. They respond to Jesus with great eagerness. They're amazed with who he is. They're amazed with what he has to say. They hear the testimony of this broken woman who's been transformed. They believe. They hear the words of Jesus himself. They believe. They love Jesus for who he is in himself. This is the Messiah this is the Savior of the world. They get who Jesus is. They love who Jesus is. They aren't thinking of him as a means to another end. He is the end. They see it. They love it. And in Galilee, apparently, Jesus is seen as a tool, a resource to be utilized for the sake of gaining things that they really want. And that's why their reception of him is dishonoring to him. Does that make sense? This is why it's dishonoring for them to welcome him simply as a tool to get what they really love. The Galileans aren't worshipers of Jesus. Jesus is regarded by them as a servant of the things that the Galileans are truly worshiping, the things that they're truly obsessed with. Whether that's their own children, or whether that's just the signs themselves, Jesus is not the headliner. And it's just a good reminder, I think, for us that Jesus intends to be the headliner in our lives. His signs and his wonders and his provisions and his healings and his blessings and his gifts, all these good things that God gives to us are intended to be windows through which we are invited to see him. And wow, those gifts are good. The window is good. The miraculous signs are good. What an awesome gift that is, that God would do this for people. And not just the miraculous signs, but the everyday gifts of God are very good. God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. The creation is good. His gifts are good. But they're never intended to be the main event. We should not live for the earthly blessings of God as though these things are the ultimate point of life, which is precisely what the flesh tends to do with created things. That's what we learn in Romans chapter 1, is that when God makes this beautiful world, rather than thanking God and honoring God, what human beings who are infected with sin tend to do is they tend to look to the created things, and they exchange the glory of God for created things, and they worship and serve the creature rather than the creator. Our very sinful tendency is to worship the gift, which means that we have a propensity to misuse those gifts. We have a tendency to ignore the light that should be shining through the window of the gift. We fail to give thanks to God. We fail to honor God, and we become obsessed with the glass of the window. We become window worshipers. We are not looking through the window. We're not seeing glory come through the window in the gifts of God. We're worshiping the gifts of God. This is what we all tend to do, right? I'm talking about myself. So I'm just giving you an autobiography right now. Okay? And a biography about your life. Yeah, that's what we do. We easily fail to see God through the gift. It can happen with supernatural signs and wonders. You can become infatuated with the signs and wonders themselves. That's what's happening with all these believers that saw him do these signs in Galilee. You can become infatuated with the everyday gifts of God, the everyday things that God has given to us. Both of them are windows. Both of them are good. And we'll live as though these things are the point of life. We'll live as though marriage is the point of life, because it's so good. We'll live as though children are the point of life. We'll live as though housing is the point of life. Getting in the right neighborhood is the point of life. Getting the right education is the point of life. Getting the right job is the point of life. Having the right income is the point. We'll live and serve these things like it's everything, right? You've tasted this. We'll live for these things. And they're all good things that have the potential to be windows into the kind heart of God. Gifts that can point us to the person of God. A God who can heal. A God who can provide. a God who can delight the heart. He wants us to see through those gifts that He's a good God. God can give us marriage. Jesus can give us family. He can give us a home. He can give us a neighborhood, employment. Jesus can give us our health. Miraculously, He can give us our health. He can give you your education. He can give you miracles. And when He does, we should erupt in praise. It's a glorious revelation of the kind heart of God as He gives all these things to us. But the question that we have to ask is, what if He doesn't? What if He doesn't heal this boy? What if He doesn't give you that income you've been working for, going to college for? What if He doesn't give you the home? We've put offers down on 2 homes. We're in between homes right now. We sold our home, or it's under contract. We need to find a home. We've put offers down on 2 different homes. They're both, we lost both of them. You okay with losing your home? Right. Good question. Watch how you respond. That'll reveal a lot about what's going on in the heart, right? How much do you love this? How much do you want this? How much are you living for this? Jesus is great. And sometimes He shows that greatness through the provision of His gifts, right? Everybody in this, the roof ought to be blowing off the Marriott this morning with praise to God for His good gifts in our lives. There's so much goodness poured out on Choice City Church. But He's still great even if He doesn't provide these things. And that's what the cross shows us. You got nothing else? You got the cross. And the cross gave you Jesus. Now and forever, the cross gave us Jesus. The cross gave us God. That we get God now. And is that what we love? Is that enough? Will that be enough for this man? Will that be enough for you? Will that be enough for me? He will not give us our health forever. It will leave. We will die unless He comes back first. Everyone in this room. Is Jesus enough? You will not have your house forever. You will not eat good food forever. Well, you will. Okay, we will. We will have all this stuff forever, but the stuff, we will have what this stuff is a shadow of forever. We will have the reality forever. We will feast forever. We will have a home forever. We will be with Jesus forever. But all this stuff here, it's all going to perish. Will Jesus be enough? Jesus is the headliner because Jesus is supreme over all these things. Jesus is better than all these things. We're going to sing it later today. Jesus is better. If we come to Jesus and we hope in Jesus and we love in Jesus only because or primarily because or ultimately because He helps us get the things in this life that are most precious to us, then we don't really love Jesus for who Jesus really is. What if He doesn't heal the marriage? What if He doesn't get you out of debt? What if He doesn't heal the body? What if He doesn't provide the home? And I'm not saying we can't ask for these things. You should ask for these things. And I'm not saying we can't simply desire desirable things in life, like that your child would not die. I'm not saying that. I'm saying let this be an opportunity for us to check our hearts, make sure that we don't think of Jesus as a mere tool. That's what we can learn here. Is Jesus just a heavenly mechanism that we go to when we are desperate and longing for the things of this world? As opposed to a person whom we actually love and we actually enjoy because He's great, because He's supremely good, and He's supremely good in good times, and He's supremely good in bad times. I want Jesus to be what I love most. I want Jesus to be what you love most. Jesus was not what this man loved most. This royal official. And Jesus knew it. So Jesus rebukes him for the request. Unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. It takes signs and wonders for you people, doesn't it? Because that's what you love. There's an obsession with the windows and no attention to the glory shining through. Well, it's funny because the rebuke doesn't faze this guy at all. He doesn't even stutter. It's his kid, right? He loves his kid. Verse 48. So Jesus said to him, unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. The official said to him, sir, come down before my son dies. I don't even know what you just said. I don't even care what you just said, which is the problem, right? He does not even care what Jesus is trying to say to him. He's just he's dying. And I think we can understand, I can understand how this happens. But Jesus is trying to help him out. The guy's got his ears plugged. He doesn't even care. And the response of Jesus, I think, at this point is extreme. It's totally ironic. It's very compassionate. It's very understanding. I'm reminded of the Psalm 103 or 104. He remembers our frame. He knows that we're dust. He knows how weak this guy. He knows this guy is weak. He knows this guy is totally stuck in his blindness and his idolatry. He's saying things, doesn't even jar the guy. He knows he's stuck. And so he's going to break through. And he does it in such a kind way because rather than trying to hammer the point home by letting the child die, which he could have done, rather than hammering the point home by exposing his idolatry, by taking that idol away, rather than denying him the miraculous healing that he's asking for, rather than breaking the window, break the window so that you're not so obsessed with the glass. The man's urgent request wins the heart of the Lord, and Jesus heals his kid. It's amazing. Verse 50, Jesus said to him, go, your son will live. And check this out. The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and went on his way. In this instance, Jesus does not break the window. Jesus heals the window. Makes it more beautiful. Heals his kid. I think it's worth noting that Jesus performs the miracle in a very strategic way. It seems that in light of the Galilean propensity to focus too much on the miracles himself, Jesus does the miracle in such a way that, number one, he removes himself from the immediate scene of the healing. So, presumably, so he doesn't stir up a scene, because they're already infatuated with the sign. So he just removes himself from the scene, heals the kid from a distance. He's not in sight for the miracle. It's probably not going to perpetuate the problem any further. You know, he's not in the public eye for this one. And the second thing that's really interesting about the way he does it is he performs the miracle in a way that invites the man to take Jesus at his word. You have to believe what I say, which means that the man has to interact with Jesus without yet seeing the miracle. He has to consider this man and the trustworthiness of his word and his authority to do what he just said he was going to do. It's a brilliant solution. It's as though Jesus is saying, I'm going to heal your son. I know you love your son. I love your son. And I love you. And even though you don't yet have any love for me, and you won't even listen to anything that I'm saying, I'm going to preserve the life of your child. He's a gift to you. He's a gift. He's a window. And this healing will be a gift to you. And I'm going to do this in such a way that your heart will be healed in the process. I'm going to heal him in such a way that you're not going to be able to focus on the miracle right now. You're going to have to focus on me. You're going to have to look at me. You're going to have to listen to me. You're going to have to think about you're going to have an encounter with Jesus, the person, right now. I'm going to take your eyes off of the miracle. You're going to have to listen to my words. You're going to have to trust me. And you're going to have to wait upon me for me to do what only I can do, and now what I've said that I will do. Will you hold fast to the promise of God? So Jesus is giving the gift of his son back to him. He's giving the gift of a miracle. And he's doing it in a time and in a way that cultivates the man's heart. And he turns a window worshiper into a Christ worshiper like that. The man believes his word. I feel like Jesus did something similar in my own life before he gave me a wife. He made me a worshiper. I loved the thought of getting married. I was one of those, all the guys I ever met were like, I never want to get married. I was like, I can't wait to get married. Sounds fun. And it was an idol in my life. And the Lord just would not give that to me. I never had a relationship that lasted longer than 2 weeks until I met Amy. I was not successful at this thing. And the Lord kept that out of my hands until He healed my window worshiping. I got to the point where I was able to say, you know what? Jesus is better. And I may never marry. And I'm not thrilled about that thought, but if I get you, Lord, and I don't get a wife, that's all I'm going to need. And so, great, here's a wife. Jesus gives the gift in a way that prevents this man from idolizing the gift. And it produces faith in the man's life. Verse 50, Jesus said to him, "Go, your son will live." The man believed the word that Jesus had spoken to him. He hasn't even witnessed the miracle. He's had an encounter with Jesus. He believes his word. The boy's healing is now underway. The guy doesn't even know it, but the moment that Jesus said, "Your son will live," he's healed. He starts to recover. The official doesn't know it yet. Did I say Jesus doesn't know it? The official doesn't know it yet. He doesn't find out till the next day that his son started recovering the day before, the exact time. In fact, let's just read it. Verse 51. As he was going down, his servants met him and told him that his son was recovering. So he asked them the hour when he began to get better, and they said to him, "Yesterday at the 7th hour, the fever left him." The father knew that was the hour when Jesus had said to him, "Your son will live." So the son's healing is underway, but this guy doesn't even know about it until the next day. So he's just holding on to the word. He's holding on to the promise. His heart's been changed. And look what the miracle produces. The middle of verse 53. The father knew that this was the hour when Jesus had said to him, "Your son will live." Oh, the miracle! It happened. And he himself believed, and all his household. Now the miracle doesn't become an object of worship. It now actually it functions like a window. He sees glory in it, and it fuels his faith. This is what I was saying earlier, that signs, wonders, the gifts of God have an incredible ability to worship them. Signs can also be used to aid faith. And what's the difference between the two? The difference is whether or not you're going to worship the sign or whether or not you worship Jesus. And if you worship Jesus, then the sign actually fuels the faith. If you don't worship the window, you actually get to see glory shining through the window. And it fuels your heart. The miracle strengthens his faith. Initially, this miracle, it seems like it probably would have only perpetuated the problem in this man's life. If Jesus had just gone down with him, healed his son, this guy wouldn't give a rip about Jesus. But Jesus works in his heart, and now the man does not regard Jesus as a mere tool. Jesus is somebody that he believes in. Jesus is somebody that he trusts, and therefore the miracle works for its intended purposes. It's a window through which he sees Jesus, and it increases his faith. And it has a ripple effect too. It bleeds into his whole family. His entire family comes to faith as a result. When the gifts of God are the obsession of our hearts, and we live as though the gifts of God, miraculous or ordinary, when we live as though the gifts of God are the main point of life, the main thing in life, it proves to be a very disappointing way to live. It's very disappointing because they're not beautiful enough to sustain the heart. 2, it's really unfair to put the pressure on these created things to satisfy you like only God can. It's really unfair for a wife to idolize her husband because she's expecting him to be what only God can be. It's very unfair to kids to idolize them because you put pressure on them to be God in your life. And then they disappoint you. And then you're angry at them because they disappointed you. And on top of all of that, you're missing out on tasting the glory that you could otherwise be seeing shining through the window of these gifts. When we approach God with this mentality, we're like this official who's coming to Jesus, and he doesn't really love Jesus, he doesn't really listen to Jesus. He just wants to use Jesus, and it's just not how it's supposed to work. We're not made to worship God's gifts. God's gifts aren't made to be worshipped. And God is not a tool in the service of our idolatry. This is just not how it should work. We are made to worship God and to see Him in and through His gifts. So when God does that awesome work of reorienting our lives so that God Himself is the obsession, then the gifts of God are able to function the way that they're intended to function. They function as windows, and we see God in them. We see the kindness of God in His provision. We see the love of God, the tenderness of God in the provision. We see the grace of God in the provision. And rather than the gifts of God becoming distractions from God, the gifts of God become glimpses of Him. They're a window. And rather than destroying our faith, the gifts of God can serve to strengthen our faith. It's just terribly ironic. In all this, God's gifts are most fully enjoyed when they are not supremely enjoyed. They are good goods, and they are terrible gods. And more importantly than the fact that this is not where we want to live, and more importantly than that, this is not where God wants us to live. And thankfully, God has seen this tendency in us to dishonor Him by worshiping His gifts, and because of that, He moved in. He saw that we would dishonor Him, and because of that, He moved in. Just like Jesus saw that the Galileans were going to dishonor Him, and He moved in. And He pursued us, and like He did this official, He pursued us to heal us from our window worship so that the good gifts might serve to increase our obsession, not with the gifts, but with the giver.